Good afternoon, everybody. This is the February 17th, 2022 afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Good afternoon, Megan. Please call the roll.
Rubio.
Here.
Ryan.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Maps.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here, under Portland City Code and state law, the City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of the council are attending remotely by video and teleconference, and the city has made several avenues available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting's available to the public on the city's YouTube channel, eGovPDX, www.portlandoregon.gov/video, and channel 30. The public may provide written testimony to the council by emailing the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. Council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and to promote physical distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thanks to everyone for your patience, your flexibility, and your understanding as we manage through these challenging situations to conduct the city's business. With that, we'll hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Heidi, is that you today? Nope. Who?
I think it's Lori. Yeah.
Lori, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions, reports, or the first readings of ordinances. The published council agenda at www.portland.gov/council/agenda contains information about how and when you may sign up for testimony while the city council is holding electronic meetings. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When your time is up, the presiding officer will ask you to conclude. Disruptive conduct such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being placed on hold or ejected from the remainder of the electronic meeting. Please be aware that all council meetings are recorded.
Very good. Thank you. We have one item on our agenda this afternoon. Megan, item 115, please.
Ratify a successor collective bargaining agreement between the city on behalf of Portland Police Bureau and the Portland Police Association relating to the terms and conditions of employment of represented employees in the Portland Police Association bargaining unit for 2021 to 2025.
Thank you. Colleagues, today we're going to hear about the ratification to the collective bargaining agreement with the Portland Police Association, our police union. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We need to make sure that our police bureau has the necessary tools, resources, training, and personnel to be able to do their jobs effectively. And the success of the bureau also depends upon accountability to the public that we serve. We've heard the public loudly and clearly that it's necessary to support police reform and practices to rebuild trust with our community. Now I want to thank my City Council colleagues for their involvement and hard work in negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement with the Portland Police Association. This was a team effort, which makes it somewhat unusual compared to past practice. I want to thank Stephen Schuback, our outside legal counsel who took the role of lead negotiator on behalf of the city. Each council office assigned a staff member to the bargaining team, and I want to thank Bobby Lee, Carly Edwards, Rico Lujan Valerio, Shannon Carney, and Mark Bond for all of their incredible hard work and the time they spent representing each council office on the bargaining team. I also want to give a big thanks to Deputy Chief Mike Fromm for his dedication, his service, and his commitment to the bargaining process. I also want to thank Kathy Bless and Heidi Brown, Ron Zito, Jarrell Gaddis, and Marquise Fudge for their HR and legal expertise on the bargaining team and all the time and work that they put into the negotiations. And finally, I want to thank the Portland Police Association for their commitment to change and to finding new ways to move forward together. We got a lot accomplished in this contract. The many changes we obtained in this contract lay the foundation for our work in the future as we continue to develop the best and most forward-thinking police bureau to meet the needs of our community. This, of course, has been a long process. It began back in November of 2019 when Commissioner Hardesty and I held 2 public listening sessions. Members of the public shared their priorities for change. They included community oversight, equity and diversity, transparency, discipline, and mental health. We achieved community oversight through the ballot and included transition language to the new board in the contract. We achieved greater transparency by including new language in the Embarrassment Clause, as it's called, that gives council more flexibility in commenting on a matter while the investigation is going on, while recognizing both the requirement and the importance of due process. In addition, changes in state law provide further transparency by requiring submission to the Oregon Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, otherwise known as DPSST, of all final discipline actions for officers who receive a suspension or greater for public posting on their website. We bargained a new discipline guide that incorporates many of the issues requested by the public and provides for greater accountability. Stronger discipline for certain types of misconduct, including racist and biased behaviors, use of force that violates policy, and offers who fail to attempt to de-escalate. Some issues raised during the listening sessions, such as equity, diversity, and the mental health of our officers, are topics that we as management will continue to work on improving, as these are not areas that were required to bargain, but they are important. Incorporating equity and diversity focuses into our hiring. The Portland Police Bureau already does. And diverse oversight boards, these currently exist. Officer mental health. This is something that's important to the Portland Police, and there's a strong focus on providing mental health support to officers at the Bureau. Additionally, we agreed on the expansion of the Portland Street Response that brings together managers and employees from all of our public safety bureaus, including Portland Street Response members, to determine how to integrate this critical service into our overall public safety response model. We also addressed retention and recruitment issues with bonuses and some focused pay increases that mostly start in 2024. We are competing with both local and national law enforcement agencies, some of whom are offering $25,000 recruitment bonuses, and local agencies that we're aware of that are offering up to $7,500 in bonuses. The pay increases focus on matters important to the city and to the public: crisis intervention training, education, and DPSST certifications. With the changes in the law combined with this contract, we've taken a step forward towards better policing in Portland. Colleagues, there's one additional item of business before I hand this off to Kathy Bless and Heidi Brown for their presentation. I've proposed an amendment to the ordinance that's posted as part of this agenda item. The original language is in the ordinance, included the cost of living adjustments in the calculations in paragraph D. However, those monies were already part of PPB's budget. So the amendments revise paragraph D to direct the budget office to appropriate monies as required under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement instead of setting a specific amount. Therefore, the actual amounts appropriated will be less than is stated in the original ordinance. I'd like to move to amend the ordinance as reflected in the proposed amendment posted on the council clerk's website. Can I please get a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Hardesty. We will leave this amendment open until the conclusion of public testimony today, and then we will take a vote on the amendment. And now I'll hand it over to our Chief Human Resources Officer, Kathy Bless, and Chief Deputy City Attorney Heidi Brown to present on the item. Welcome, Kathy and Heidi.
Thank you. So I'm going to start here, and thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. For the record, I am Kathy Bless, Chief Human Resource Officer for the city. I also want to echo our Bureau's gratitude for the Council's participation in this process and for the expert lead provided by both Stephen and Heidi and Deputy Chief Mike Frome. It is also important to acknowledge council offices and acknowledge and thank the community of the city of Portland who have collectively demanded more, demanded better, and demanded a voice within the process and its outcome. The Bureau of Human Resources has historically had a professional and collaborative relationship with both the Police Bureau and the Portland Police Association. Human Resources supports all employees, even under the most difficult of circumstances, of which the last 2 years have been extraordinarily difficult. Negotiating a collective bargaining contract with the Portland Police Association, whose members have been uniquely challenged to change, has been complex. And I want to thank the Portland Police Association, specifically Anil Karia and its new president, Aaron Schmaltz, for the commitment to continue conversations related to body-worn cameras and to come to agreement on all other issues in lieu of full contract arbitration to the mutual interests of accountability, integrated Portland street response, retention, and recruitment. We know there is continued work to be done, and VHR is committed to work with both the Bureau and the union moving forward. My comments really are very brief. I'm going to now turn it over to Heidi Brown so she can review the process, and then to Stephen, who will walk through the highlights of the contract changes. Heidi?
Thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Heidi Brown. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Chief Deputy City Attorney for the Labor and Employment Group. And thank you for having us this afternoon on this pretty momentous occasion. I just wanted to walk through a little bit to remind all of us and for the public to remember the process that we used. And really, as I was writing this out and kind of remembering it, it really highlights the transparency that occurred during this bargaining session, very different than I think we've ever had before. And I think Stephen would say than he's ever seen in all the collective bargaining he's done. And so I think that was a real success. So when we started, as the mayor mentioned, we had 2 listening sessions with the public, and that was in November of 2019, so 2.5 years ago almost now. From that, council, with the information that was received from all of the public, along with the issues and matters that they felt were important, developed some priorities. And throughout bargaining, those stayed as part of our priorities. One of the things that we heard from the public was the interest, as the mayor said, in transparency. And so we bargained, we started out right away bargaining for open bargaining sessions. And we were able to achieve alternating open bargaining sessions. And so when we first started bargaining on this new contract in January of 2020, sorry. Yeah. Then we started with actually 2 open to the public bargaining sessions. And then we started alternating with the union. And when the union hosted, those were closed to the public. We also agreed early on that we would provide joint press releases and we would post any tentative agreements that we had achieved. And that is something that we lived up to. In March, as everybody knows, the pandemic ensued and we closed down, and that created challenges for us in bargaining. And there were also other challenges financially and health and crises going on within our city that required the attention. And so we extended the contract for 1 year and agreed within that to start bargaining again in January of 2021. And that's what we did. We extended bargaining. And again, we started with an open public session and we alternated back and forth. On the city's behalf, we continued to have open bargaining sessions as we could provide. And then when we got through the required 150 days of bargaining, negotiation, the union then moved to declare impasse and requested that we go to or not to declare impasse, requested that we move to mediation, which they're allowed to do under the law. So at that point, we moved out of the public arena, but we did continue as we were able to gain tentative agreements. We continued to post those on the Rethink Portland website. And then once we had a full agreement, we posted that for public interest on our website and released that. And then finally, last Thursday, Stephen and Kathy and I hosted a question and answer period for the public, and there were approximately 80 people in attendance at that. And then in addition, there were some remaining questions at the end of the hour-and-a-half session, and those were responded to as well, and either have been or will be very soon publicly posted on the Rethink Portland website. So I just wanted to walk that through that because that really is a very different methodology and approach to bargaining. And I think it was very effective and the best we could under the law as it stands today. And I appreciated all the input from everybody. And then finally, before I turn it over to Stephen, I do want to tell you how much of a joy it was to work with everybody in this process, to get the input from the public, to work with all council very closely, to work with your staff who are truly amazing people. To work with Stephen was a joy. I'm going to miss him after working so much together for 2.5 years. To work with Kathy, who I always enjoy working with, and her team, Ron and Jarrell and Marquise. And we started with DC Davis, Deputy Chief Davis, and then Deputy Chief Rome came in, and it was really a pleasure to work with him. So I want to thank all of you and council for all your dedication to this process. Really appreciated it. And now Stephen is going to kind of walk through, just give a brief overview of the changes that we were able to gain in this contract.
Thank you, Heidi. Good morning or good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. We're here today as a bargaining unit to present a due pass recommendation for ratification of the collective bargaining agreement. It has come to my attention that the Portland Police Association has ratified the contract on their end. So this ratification process would be the secondary part of a normal process to ratify a contract. That being said, as the mayor articulated very well, this contract is really a momentous change for PPA as well as the state of Oregon. Never in a time of my tenure in bargaining, both labor and management side, have I seen so much change just in the dynamics of a labor market, the dynamics of legislative changes, and the dynamics of public input. This is really an interesting and been a very noteworthy procedure where we have merged both public input as well as legislative changes into a collective bargaining agreement as related to discipline and accountability. And this will be a mark for the next 30 to 40 years on the progress that Portland and Oregon has made. In regards to the contract itself, without going too much into the weeds, we're all aware that we have now negotiated a corrective action guide. Some will refer to it as the disciplinary guide, but our true terminology is the corrective action guide. That guide is a prescriptive methodology in order to determine how to address appropriate sanctions and appropriate actions in allegations of misconduct or policy violation. What's important about the guide is that it's not just a 3-page document with fancy colors. There is a comprehensive narrative that describes the intent of the parties. And when I say the parties, PPA, as much as the city, are a joint venture in this document. This is not a one-sided document. The narrative provides purpose, it provides direction, and it provides specific steps in order to determine and categorize actions that are subject to sanction, as well as identify a prescriptive method to reach that sanction that's fair and equitable. And the document incorporates, the contract and the guide incorporate the new changes in just cause standards and arbitrability standards. That being said as well, this document, as well as the contract, binds arbitrators in proceedings where the disciplinary action is challenged in a grievance process. The guide also is not just about sanctions, but it's also about rehabilitation and remedial training. I appreciate all council members' input over the last 2 years about acknowledging that there are times an employee needs to be fired. They have crossed the line. There are other times that an employee will remain working with us, and we will make best efforts to keep that employee engaged and give them all opportunities to grow and become better employees. And I think that's one of the most paramount advantages to this guide that we have, is that we recognize our employees and we recognize that there's a process that'll lead to resolution. The guide is married as well to the articles of the contract under Article 20, discipline, the grievance process, and Article 61, the due process. All those work in unison, and they are all tied together to recognize the upcoming oversight board, as well as the upcoming legal requirements of the guide. In regards to the embarrassment clause, we've had a lot of discussion, and the mayor presented on that as well. The embarrassment clause has been modified by language, but also by bargaining note, which is essentially a nod of the parties acknowledging that in this circumstance, when there is a pending discipline, city council or commissioners have the opportunity to comment on those, but with the understanding that there is a process in play. And until that due process is finalized and there's a final determination, we may emphasize or acknowledge critical events that occur. However, just as in a criminal case, we won't pass judgment until that process is completed. We feel as a bargaining team that this was a good resolution and compromise to meet the needs of the union, as well as the public need in addressing a disciplinary process and providing information to the public. The grievance process has been better identified too to anticipate the future of the oversight board, such that grievances may be handled by that oversight board, and that also arbitrators will be bound by the new disciplinary just cause standard that is statewide. Collectively, when we look at the guide, the narrative, and these various articles, as well as the legislation before us, I think we have met the needs of the public as well as the legislatures to fully meet the issues of accountability and transparency as much as possible. I know there's still some discussion about open meetings that is in the public eye, and that'll be a matter that will have to be left to the legislatures to decide if under PECBA, the Collective Bargaining Act, bargaining can be open by law. But until then, we are still bound by the Collective Bargaining Act. A whole nother area that we've worked on towards mental health is the Portland Street Response Program. That was initiated slightly before we started bargaining as a pilot program. We've now reached a memorandum of understanding that we can continue with that program. And that program, as it develops, needs experts at the table to determine best appropriate protocols to respond to the various emergent events that occur. That is a blend of Portland Police, Portland Fire, and the Portland Street Response team. It is appropriate that through this MOU, those parties that do those duties are engaged in deciding the best protocols, and that's the resolution that we reached. Through that MOU, once they determine the best protocols that are present, then that will go for adoption by the various department heads, and the people doing the work will be best fulfilled to do the work mutually. I find that PPA was exceptionally helpful in getting us to reach that agreement. And we appreciate their efforts in looking at the fact that this city is all inclusive in providing services, and that we need to be mindful that many agencies may respond to various calls at the same time or differently. So this is a good resolution for the Portland Street Response Agreement. There are a few administrative cleanup matters in the contract. Contracts require constant maintenance. There were a few things that we proposed that we were not able to make progress on, such as some overtime concerns. We did make progress on outside employment, and that we better identified through the bargaining process and discussion what our objectives are for outside employment or secondary employment. So that's been resolved. Bargaining is not always an opportunity to get contract language change, but it is always an opportunity to have discussion and better understand each other's roles. And I feel for secondary employment, we've reached that objective, and the parties have now had changes procedurally that have met those objectives without the need for contract change. So that's a slight win for us there. The rest of the contract, again, is mostly administrative catch-up or legalese to adjust with changes in legislation or changes in operations and benefits and so forth. Lastly are the economics. The ordinance covers the economics, and I'll leave economics to Heidi and or myself through the Q&A or questions from you directly as they're spelled out in the ordinance.
No questions at this time, Stephen. Thank you.
So if I can just conclude, I'm very thankful for the opportunity to have worked with you all. It's been a wonderful experience. I think you have provided an example to the rest of the state with the involvement of the commissioner members at the bargaining table is really revolutionary and helpful, so that there is unison as an entity so large as yours is, that we make progress through this very long bargaining process. I think it's really helped. And I think it's shown PPA that you are all committed to working with them as an entity as well in providing a strong labor relationship. Strong labor relationships lead to better employees, better morale, and also continued employment. On a personal note, again, thank you all bargaining team members for putting up with me through 2 years. And again, I'm very thankful for the opportunity.
Stephen, on behalf of all of us, thank you. As you know, as we weighed the idea of having outside legal counsel, it was fraught with potential pitfalls. You worked very, very well with our legal counsel. You acted with great diligence, and we all appreciate it. Thank you for this, and thank you for a great resolution.
Thank you.
Kathy, does that complete the big show here?
It does. It does.
All right, good. So unless any of my colleagues have any questions right now, we'll move to public testimony. Very good. Megan, how many folks do we have signed up for public testimony today?
12 individuals signed up, and we have 10 on the call.
Very good. 3 minutes each, please. Name for the record.
All right. We have Michelle Stevenson, Dan Handelman, and Sandy.
Hello, my name is Michelle Stevenson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a community member and I speak for myself. Before I start, my son is home. He has coronavirus, so please be compassionate about that if he breaks down my door. I wanted to speak so I'm heard and on public record as being strongly against the entire secretive, undemocratic process of this negotiation between the Portland Police Association and the City of Portland. This closed-door process belongs to an authoritarian police state, not to a free democratic society. The question of how a community is policed should lie in the hands of the community members. I look forward to working peacefully for that change to union and labor law on a federal and state level. There are some wins in the 2022 Portland Police Association and City of Portland agreement. There are also serious issues of worry. I will address two issues that popped out at me in reading the agreement: the Portland Street Response expansion and the Embarrassment Clause. While I love that Portland Street Response is being extended to the whole city, I worry about the integration of PSR and PPB training and on-the-job directive. I want to be clear that I personally don't feel safe calling police. I don't trust police. I have very good reasons for that. I have called police when things got very bad in a couple situations. I've been physically unsafe because of my reluctance to call the police. Having an option to call someone I trust for help makes my whole family safer. PSR is the hope for equal access to public safety for a lot of people, not just my family. In this integration, it is necessary to allow community members a choice of who responds to a call for help. On a personal level, I think the part of this agreement that hurts me the most is the Embarrassment Clause. When police do bad things, the city government and her officials can't talk about an event in a way that might embarrass the officers. In cases that sometimes last years, the procedural due process agreement becomes the way our government officials talk about an event in public, period. Even after disposition is decided, the bargaining notes explicitly extend this clause infinitely and provides disciplinary privacy to a PPB member. Police wrongdoing and criminality is embarrassing because it shocks the conscience of any good-hearted community member. Our problem isn't that we're talking about police wrongdoing and criminality. It is the actual wrongdoing and criminality that is the pathology. It is only by talking about the wrongdoing and criminality that our city can start to heal. An inability of elected officials and police to own that painful incidents actually happened and were completely morally evil is going to compound institutional betrayal trauma for vulnerable victims. It will prevent Portland, including Portland Police Bureau itself, from healing and becoming better from these terrible experiences. History is written by the winners, and that understanding is a main foundation of every successful subjugation and revolution. Every community member must be able to speak up and be heard, and our leaders must not be silent. We must not abridge our right to speech. We need to do better. Owning where we come from, the full history of where we have been, is the best way to do better. We need to learn from our mistakes, not shove our mistakes down because they're uncomfortable to see. Our city officials need the ability to speak clearly and strongly about the problems facing Portland. I have read the mediation notes and the question and answer responses from city mediators. The added qualifications in this agreement does not change the fact that the right to public speech by public officials is being severely abridged. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you.
Next up, Dan Handelman.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
I'm sorry, Dan, I apologize to interrupt. Megan, can you make sure you're also monitoring the clock? When we get to 3 minutes, we need to move on to the next individual. Thanks.
Yes, just to confirm, you'd just like us to mute them?
Yeah, 3 minutes. I think most everybody on the call today is pretty familiar with it, but in case you're not, just so we can get through everything in our business, at the end of your 3 minute period, the mic will be muted and we'll move on to the next person. Thank you.
Well, as it happens, Mayor Wheeler, the first thing I was going to do was ask if I could get an extra minute since we had 3 hours set aside for this. And so I wonder if I might be allowed to have a 4th minute.
Dan, I'm sure you are very good and can get it done in 3 minutes, but if any colleagues have follow-up questions, I'm sure they would be happy to ask that. As you know, questions do not count towards your 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. So Mayor Wheeler and members of council, I'm Dan Handelman. I'm with Portland Cop Watch. While there was some minimal progress made in negotiating the police association contract, there are also a lot of problems. My testimony today falls under the headings money, policies, and process. Money. The ordinance is being amended to take the total amount set aside for increases to the police budget from $56 million to somewhere around $28 million, if my calculations are right. While you're spending community money like this, it would be good to include a bottom line in the paperwork. Incidentally, the year-over-year increases modified in the ordinance aren't reflected in the impact statement. However, the most alarming figures remain: a proposed increase of 134 officers between now and 2024 with no public discussion. You can see this baked into the ordinance by dividing the retention bonuses of $4.7 million by 5,000 per officer and get 954 officers, and the proposed $2.1 million bonus in 2024 by $2,000, which is 1,088 cops. Portland can't even fill the 100+ vacancies right now in the authorized force. Policies. I stated this at the Q&A session. Will be clear that my work on the contract issue predates even my ability to apply for the Police Accountability Commission. My comments here are for Portland Cop Watch. There are certainly a few gains made in oversight with language which seems to allow someone other than police officer to compel testimony and nominally for the board to propose discipline. However, it feels as if the language around these issues is vague enough for the PPA to challenge the city's interpretation. Bargaining notes state clearly there's a disagreement about what has to be bargained, even though with the passage of SB 621. Also, the city is missing a huge opportunity to turbocharge the IPR using these criteria once the auditor passes control back to you in July. Whenever we are asking for change, the community is always told that the city can't do this or that because they need to go negotiate with the PPA and or that the US DOJ agreement doesn't allow it. The city just signed off on changes to the DOJ agreement, including a timeline to set up the new board, and negotiated this contract with a discipline guide that the commission had no input into and that will bind the board's decisions. The resolution setting up the commission says they should have been given a private briefing on these issues by the city attorney. I can say that such a session was not held. Another policy change that is open to interpretation, the addition of the words reasonable suspicion to the clause that allows drug testing. The community believes this means, officer, you have never shot at anyone before. We need to see if you're on drugs. The PPA likely believes this means, officer, you have bloodshot eyes and are walking unusually, criteria that probably already would lead to a drug test. So there's probably no real change in adding these words. In the discipline guide, it says an officer can only be terminated for racial bias if A, there are aggravating circumstances, or B, it involves misuse of police authority. Can anyone say whether Sergeant Lewis, who could not be fired for making jokes about shooting black people shortly after the death of Quantas Hayes, would be fired under this new guide? There's so much more, including that there are no substance changes to the Embarrassment Clause, no changes at all to the outside work police can do for private corporations, or to the benefits afforded officers being investigated that are not offered to community members. And the city, again, has kicked the can down the road on body camera policies after rushing into a contract to buy the equipment just last week. So my process questions I can hold. If there are questions for me, I can explain my process issues.
Commissioner Mapps.
Dan, could you take 1 minute and complete your comments on process issues?
Why, thank you, Commissioner Mapps. I'd be glad to. So this 110-page contract was released last Tuesday with just 2 days to come up with questions for the bargaining team. Inadequate answers to many of the questions were released last night with less than 24 hours before this council hearing. The community was allowed to be part of the process for the first 5 months, but was shut out for the last 7 months. In the meantime, it looks like when the city pushed down on a balloon in one place, the air just moved somewhere else to cause other problems. The air in this metaphor is the unchanging political power of the PPA. Since they've made the case they are part of this community too, we hope the PPA will come forward and explain what they think they gave up and gained and how it helps Portland as a whole. They seem to want to have it both ways, complaining about being on the front lines for people with mental health issues and then screaming loudly when someone else does the work, requiring that the city can't remove police positions in response to adding more street response teams. My final point on process is that the contract was presented as something that could be best changed by extending it for short periods of time and then going back to the table. Instead, this locks in the contract for 4 whole years ending in 2025, when it's possible the entire city council will be made up of different people. And thank you very much for your time and for the extra time.
Thank you.
Next, we have Sandy.
Good afternoon, mayors and commissioners. I'm Sandy Chung, Executive Director of the ACLU of Oregon. Our organization fights for civil liberties and civil rights with more than 28,000 members statewide, with many of these members in Portland. In their most recent report to you, the OIR group, a consultant engaged by you, made the following observations, among others, that many points and types of data, including internal Portland Police Bureau data, show that the Portland police disproportionately harm Black individuals through stops, arrests, and violence. That Portland Police Bureau can be intransigent to change, that mistakes continue year after year. that the Portland Police Association has been reactionary, severe, and aggressive in ways that have not served the community, the city, and Portland Police too. Many of the words and phrases I've used previously are directly from the OIR report. Especially with these observations by OIR in mind, the following are some specific concerns that the ACLU of Oregon has about the proposed collective bargaining agreement. First, although PPA agreed to expansion of Portland Street Response in principle, PPA still has the ability to thwart this program via the CBA because the allowable scope of Portland Street Response is still subject to determination, with PPA being a significant part of the body making that determination. Second, there are restrictions in the CBA on the ability of the Community Oversight Board to make changes to the disciplinary guide, even though it is very likely that the Community Oversight Board will need this ability to create real accountability for officer misconduct and violence. Third, some of the increased monies in the CBA are to recruit new police officers. However, bringing new employees into a dysfunctional and harmful work culture will simply result in more employees who are acculturated into that dysfunctional and harmful work culture. Indeed, research shows that when a work culture has permissiveness with unethical conduct, that results in unethical conduct by other employees who may not have acted that way in other work cultures. Fourth, although the public needs transparency about officer misconduct and violence, the CBA limits disciplinary information that can be shared. And finally, but not least, under the CBA, officers under investigation are still able to get the names of complainants and witnesses, even though this increases the possibility of retaliation and will likely prevent some people from stepping forward in an investigation. It is important that in every contractual and budget decision involving the Portland Police Bureau, the City Council makes decisions that will create accountability for police officer misconduct and violence. The CBA as it proposed, especially with a long 4-year term, does not do this. Moreover, the minimal concessions made by the Portland Police Association is not worth the over $56 million that the impact analysis projects this collective bargaining agreement will cost Portland taxpayers. For the above reasons, the ACLU of Oregon opposes the City Council's approval of this collective bargaining agreement as it is without changes to it. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor, I have a question for Sandy.
Mr. Hursti.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sandy, so much for being here today and testifying on behalf of the ACLU. I have heard several times people's frustration with the 4-year process. I mean, the 4-year contract. I will say, as you know, the DOJ is requiring us to hire a civilian training dean, right? We have a RFP out now a job posting out looking for the right person to be that training dean. Sandy, you know, this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I've been working on this for like 30 some years, but only 3 for pay. I guess my question for you is what I believe is that there are several things that the DOJ Civil Rights Division is mandating that we do. There are several things that we as a council have put in place, and there are several things that voters have put in place, and all those things are moving granitely, like at a very, very slow pace, but they are all moving towards what I think is going to be a much more fair and equitable and transparent police force, right? And I know there was a challenge because I always want to short a contract because then we can go back and start negotiating again. But who knew when we started this one, we'd have a pandemic, then wildfires, 3 or 4 crises. It took a lot longer. What I'm asking you is, knowing what you know about how difficult it is to change contracts and move them forward and to make them transparent, maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm hoping you'll be able to say that you can at least see a path forward that appears that we're headed in the right direction, right? And I've been around long enough not to say trust me, but I do want you to see the pieces that are in place that are moving in the right direction. So that's really my question for you, Sandy. Are you seeing at least a path forward so that when we come back here 3 short years from now and start this process over, are we headed down the right path is my question.
Commissioner Hardesty, thank you so much for your question and really appreciate your leadership in this area and really trying to bring accountability to a systemic problem, not just for the city of Portland, but many other cities and municipalities across the United States. That being said, I think part of the difficulty trusting is this is not the first time that community members have brought forward concerns, and the city and the Portland Police Bureau have said that they would engage in change, but we haven't seen the necessary change and positive outcomes. And so I think there is a real frustration that, again, that nothing much will come out of this process. However, I think a real great game changer is a community oversight board, which with their leadership, the voters of the city passed by ballot measure. But I think what's really important with the collective bargaining agreement is that there's as much nimbleness built into it as possible so that we can support that community oversight process, that this collective bargaining agreement not become an obstacle to the community oversight board creating change in the system.
I just want to assure you, Sandy, when Mayor Wheeler and I started this process last time, there had never been a more transparent, more engaged process with a broad segment of the community, right? And as a grassroots person, I get frustrated that I can't get everything. And the first time I go to the bargaining table, right, that I want. But what I do know and what I believe in my soul is that we have made some significant changes that you will be able to hold us accountable to this year, next year, and the next year when we're starting those negotiations again, right? If I'd had my way, it would look a lot different, but that's why they call it a negotiation. We had to start from where we were. And honestly, I don't think our side of the table did a good job of bargaining on our behalf before the mayor and I created this dream team that actually led the negotiations this time, right? It's not perfect. It will never be perfect. And I take the criticism very to heart that we still have more work to do. But I just want you to know that all corners of the work are starting. But we're going to need you, especially you, the ACLU, and the values that you bring to this to help us actually put this new oversight board together in a way that is actually transparent, fair, and the community and the police will trust. Because it doesn't matter. We have a system now that only one side trusts. We don't want to put another system together that only one side trusts, because that won't serve our purpose. So thank you for being here. I appreciate your deep engagement. And I went on longer than I anticipated, but I just didn't want to leave that. I want people to know that we've done what we believe is the best we could get in this moment. One last thing I want to say, no matter how many positions are in the contract, we can only hire the people we can hire. And we're not going to be hiring a lot of people really soon until we get our training dean in place and have him assess the training that we currently provide. So regardless of what the documents say, we can't like dream up staff people. They will have to go through the regular process that's been set up. So thanks, Sandy.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Heidi.
Thank you, Mayor. Sandy, I just wanted to address something you and Dan Handelman raised about the Community Oversight Board and the discipline guide. And just in case some people don't know, there was a law passed last year that requires the state to adopt uniform standards, and those would apply to both the city and the oversight board. And I think, the council's feeling and our feeling was that having our own discipline guide that really took into account the concerns that are raised in the city of Portland was important. And so with this discipline guide, it will apply. And yes, it applies to the oversight board, because if it didn't, the uniform standards would. But it gave us 3 years to use our own approach that we hope will meet the needs of the city.
Thank you, Heidi. Go ahead, Megan. Next individual.
The next 3 individuals are Joanna Brenner, James Offsink, and Ashanti Hall.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear. We can see you as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Coordinating Committee of Portland Metro People's Coalition. First, we want to thank Commissioner Hardesty and the City Council for the progress that you've made. We appreciate Commissioner Hardesty's leadership in this moment. We appreciate the council's decision to hire an expert negotiator and to do as much as possible to keep the community informed. Although cut short by PPA, the open process was an important step toward changing the culture of secrecy and community suspicion that has hung over previous bargaining between the city and the PPA. Our first concern remains the necessity for community oversight of an investigation into the excessive use of deadly force. And we want to see this incorporated in the community oversight rules for the new board. We're sorry that it was not included in the contract this time around and with regard to the rules governing IPR. Another key concern of ours was the question of bias-based policing, and we do appreciate the way that the guide has honed in on this and offered possibilities for greater discipline in cases such as Dan mentioned. We are very concerned about the protocols through which Portland Street Response is going to be deployed. We are certainly glad that you were able to get the PPA to end its opposition to Portland Street Response. We understand that the protocols that need to be developed have to be developed with the input of the professionals who are in the public safety system. Nonetheless, we strongly believe that the community needs to have a say in these new protocols. And we would like to suggest that possibly the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing might be tasked with bringing community input in the way that the mayor asked them to do with regard to rethinking public safety. We really think that we want to make sure that the number of incidents to which PSR responds expands. We want to decrease the encounters through which people in mental health crisis or other distress are exposed to the risks of maiming and death that come along with police responders. We're also extremely concerned about the fact that the secondary employment continues, especially when Portland Police Bureau is spending uncontrolled amounts on overtime and the city still allows the 20 hours a week. We also believe that the state law requires the publication of the names of officers who receive suspension, but discipline at a lower level.
Next, we have James.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Excuse me, Mayor. There
Commissioner
seems to be a bit of confusion about Portland Street Response and how they roll out. I just want to say Portland Street Response is one of the responders when you call 911. And so the protocol being worked out with the police is just to make sure we're not duplicating or triplicating efforts. Many times when we don't know who to send, we send everybody, which means we would send the police, we'd send fire, we'd send AMR. And now that Portland Street Response would be citywide, we may even send them. That is a waste of resources. So we don't want to do that. But Portland Street Response is not a co-responder with police. So I want to make sure people are not confusing Portland Street Response with Project Response, which responds with police officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Go ahead, Meg.
Next, we have James Offsink.
Hi, James.
Hello. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm James Offsink. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the current president of Portland Forward. Portland Forward is a grassroots organization focused on the big ideas for the future progressive future of the region. At Portland Forward, we ask ourselves, what needs to happen now to achieve the equitable, sustainable, and just Portland of 2050? And that is why we have spent the last several years investing in criminal justice reform, including police accountability. There cannot be a fair Portland now or in the future as long as we have disproportionate policing and inequitable outcomes throughout our criminal injustice system. We have mixed feelings about the current version of the contract, although we want to recognize that the process included the community to a degree rarely, if ever, seen before, and we want to respect the community's countless hours and overwhelming efforts that went into organizing towards a fairer contract. We commend many parts of the process, including bringing in national police accountability experts to present to council a few years ago, the community listening sessions that the mayor and Commissioner Hardesty hosted and which helped inform the city's priorities, hiring an outside negotiator, pushing for the sessions to be open to the public and the media, and the council taking the process very personally. In many of the sessions that I attended, every commissioner had a staff member in attendance, which was really great to see. Having followed the negotiation process closely, it's clear that Portlanders have made some big wins, including codifying the Portland Street response as a much needed alternative to armed police responders. This is significant and should be celebrated. Additionally, Portland Forward was part of a broad coalition of organizations who helped pass the Community Oversight Board, and the gains made in this contract towards the adoption of a truly independent civilian oversight system should not be understated. Commissioner Hardesty particularly deserves a huge amount of credit for her leadership on bringing both of these justice-oriented solutions to the city. There are some items in this contract whose effect on community safety is not immediately clear. There's been a lot of discussion about the changes to the discipline guide, and we feel that it will ultimately, that it could result in more accountability. We do see as it increases discretion, it's very dependent on how that discretion is used. So we're hopeful that the allowances for greater discretion will be used in the benefit of, instead of at the expense of, community safety and trust. There are a number of parts of the contract that we feel fall short of the community's expectations, and had the community been able to continue to be engaged with the process when the most contentious and important issues were being dealt with, we feel it would have improved the city's position and met an important public need. We're disappointed to see the embarrassment that is the Embarrassment Clause persist in this contract, and we wish the contract was shorter to approach this issue again sooner. The community also wanted to see mandatory drug testing after uses of force and an end to the secondary employment program. In short, we had hoped to see larger gains in the contract, particularly at a time of unprecedented engagement, but we do feel the process was a huge improvement over past negotiations and led to better outcomes, and we call for these improvements to persist in future negotiations.
Thank you, James.
Ashanti Hall.
You're on mute.
Myself, excuse me. My name is Ashanti Hall. I'm a co-founder of Hip Hop Stands Up, which exists to amplify the voices of people of color throughout the region. I'm also an engagement specialist at the region's largest nonprofit developer of low-income housing. The only reason why I mention that is because, excuse me. The only reason why I mention that is because I tried to apply for the Q&A on a collective bargaining agreement, and with my own personal email addresses, with a Yahoo address and a Gmail address and another Gmail address, and none of those worked. I was only allowed to apply for the collective bargaining agreement using my work email address, which was concerning to me because it seems like we have less access to that than normal people can get to it. I'm not sure how pertinent that is to what we're doing now, because obviously we'll pass that, but I think it's something we should look into, and it's kind of important. I do have concerns about us hiring more officers when we can't even fill the positions we have. That's definitely it's frustrating that we're even talking about hiring more officers when we could definitely be expanding things like street response, and we could be listening to the community, which is definitely asked for such that. I also am definitely concerned about keeping the embarrassment clause in this contract. That is, to me, it just seems counterproductive to making sure that we're doing the one thing that we've been asking from this city to help us do, which is to hold violent officers accountable for their crimes. And that is more than anything else. I'm even going to really yield the rest of my time in order for you to remember that the one thing we really want you to do is to hold violent officers accountable for their crimes.
Thank you.
The next three individuals are Beverly Barnum, Diane Meisenhalter, and Mark Porras.
Can you hear me?
We sure can, Beverly. Go ahead.
Mayor Wheeler, I'd like to address you specifically. In your opening statement, you declared that this was essentially about accountability to the public we serve. And I'd like you to really meditate on that, because none of it is going to give accountability to those of us that choose to rise against social, racial, economic injustice. You know, we're still going to face the batons. We're still going to face tear gas. We're still going to be followed home. And I say this as a person that has experienced this. More than anything, I'm disappointed that you're not using your power to help those that you serve. Now, you may think that policing as we know it today is healthy. You may actually believe that. You may believe that poor people need to be policed, that people like me that choose to protest need to be policed. You may actually think that. But I think for myself, especially, when I go to Portland now, when I see a police cruiser or even a friend, I have friends in the police force, former friends in the police force. I don't respect them anymore in any shape, way, or form. I'm afraid of them doing this thing. I've never done this because I'm afraid. And I hope that you think about that, about people like me that chose to finally one day stand up and say, no more, this is wrong. And then to face what I have faced. I don't even live in Portland. I try not to go to Portland. I'm afraid of the people you're trying to protect. I'm afraid of the PPA. And maybe you should be too. They hold a lot of power over all of you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Diane Meisenhalter.
Sorry, I just lost my my document.
Diane, do you want us to go to the next person?
Yeah, could you do? No, I got it.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Commissioner Hardesty's office in particular and council for pushing for accountability and equity. And I particularly want to thank Andre Miller for providing the educational and the opportunity in the form of the dialogue with the city's chief negotiator and legal counsel to share information after the closed session just in these last few days. I must say that it seems like a number of members of the community have come away feeling a little dispirited by the proposed contract as things currently stand, when we had hopes for higher hopes from a community-driven process. If you think about it in terms of a scale, imagine the scales of justice. On the one side, you have the very concrete and enormous benefits to the PPA, 4-year contract, tremendous increases in pay and numbers of officers, bonuses for mandatory trainees, no changes in residency requires, no mandatory drug testing in the case of deadly force, no substantial contractual changes on overtime or secondary employment. The fireable offense only for intentional misuse of police authority when the community has called for broader considerations. Concern about mitigating factors allowed when there is intentional, reckless civil violations or departures from established police practice. And I could go on, but I'm just kind of trying to do this in a really fast way. On the other hand of the scale, there were some positive changes. The new corrective action guidelines, but we haven't even had a chance to totally unpack and understand those. And some of the issues of import to the community are as yet unresolved in these, as we have heard today. While it's great that progress has been made on the Portland street response and its integration, we still do not have specifics on the proposed expansion, such as in the case of suicides or indoor situations, and the yet to developed rules and whether dispatchers will actually send them out. Whether there will be community oversight on excessive use of lethal force, and the new community oversight board details, all of these are still to come. The body-worn camera guidelines are still in dispute. So if you think about balance in terms of these two scales, it feels that at the very least, there needs to be more time for the community to see the actual outcomes of some of these unresolved issues before ratifying the contract, or that the contract time needs to be reduced so that we know we do not have to wait for another 4 years for these real concerns to be addressed. There hasn't been enough time to even fully process the details of the new disciplinary guidelines, which we just were able to see this week, and to see how the whole process fits together.
Next, we have Mark Porras.
Hi, for the record, my name is Mark Porras. I use he, him pronouns, and I live in Northeast Portland. I just want to start by thanking Andre Miller from Commissioner Hardesty's office for hosting last week's Q&A for the community members to ask questions about the contract. And I really appreciate Heidi Brown and Stephen Schuback being there to answer questions. 90 minutes of Q&A. It was clearly not enough time to get all our questions answered, as we're finding out today, especially since PPA took the bargaining process behind closed doors in June. You know, we've seen some TAs, but we have no insight into how they came about. So here are a couple questions I still have. Why are we giving police officers a $5,000 retention bonus and only giving public support safety specialists a $3,000 retention bonus? In my mind, the public support safety specialists, they're the future of PPB, because I believe that most community members would rather have a less or a non-militarized police force. And the required interpersonal skills that the public support safety specialists need to have are there in my mind. It's the only hope for PPB to regain any trust with the community. Remember, in 2020, 54 cops made over $200,000. Do they really need a $5,000 retention bonus? If you really feel like PPB needs more money, then give that bonus money to the public support safety specialists. In the Portland Street Response Letter of Agreement, why does PPA get 4 of the 16 seats on the committee that creates integrated public safety response protocols? I'm ecstatic that there will be non-management employees on the committee. However, PPA, as you've heard from everybody else, they've already got enough power. To conclude, both Heidi and Stephen reminded us more than once of the need for the city to bargain in good faith with PPA. I'm personally having a hard time believing that PPA feels that same urgency to bargain in good faith with the city. And I continue to believe that the community needs a seat at the table during negotiations and that all negotiations should be open to the public. The 3 sides don't come to the table with the same amount of leverage. We shouldn't expect PPA to every time the community or the city does. I'll close with this. Police unions are not the same as public employee unions. They represent employees who have our permission to use deadly force on community members. The public needs complete transparency and true representation at the bargaining table when it comes to law enforcement negotiations. That's all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final testifier today is John H.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, cool. So thanks for the time. I don't want to say the same thing everybody else said, so I'm going to talk more generally about the contract and the changes, and feeling like there is no substantive change in anything that will help create any kind of accountability or transparency. The only significant changes I feel like we're around the Portland Street Response and the Oversight Board. I'm disappointed in the narrative that's coming from the city and the city attorney's office, making it sound like as if the PPA and the city are responsible for those changes, and that somehow the PPA was so gracious to allow those things to happen, when we know that the reason why PSR is being expanded and the oversight board is being implemented is because of community pressure. In fact, not only is it not because the PPA wanted to give us something, they've actually been a roadblock and are still opposing certain things in relation to PSR and the oversight board. I guess I'm opposed to that. There's no changes in the embarrassment clause. The having these increase in wages related to Living cost is ridiculous considering only 18% of Portland police live in Portland. We know that more rural areas aren't really seeing the spike in living costs. And they're continuing, they already got the almost 3% increase when we put it on hold, and now they're getting another increase and another increase. $54 million over the next 4 years. We need to stop giving more money to the police. I'm just super disappointed in that. And then to hear the police union and the city talk about the reason why they're short on police is because of funding. We know that a majority of them have left because they're really just throwing fits. They don't like that there's a tiny bit of accountability. It's like if they don't get to do whatever the fuck they want, then, so excuse my language, I know. If they don't get to do whatever they want, then they're gonna throw a fit and leave. I think we need to stop enabling that behavior. I know my times, I feel like there was one other thing that I wanted to touch on. The UAs, of course, there needs to be UAs every time they use force. Yeah, I think I'll stop there because I can't remember what the last point was. Thanks.
All right, thank you, John. Megan, does that complete the public testimony then? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Very good. So colleagues, before I open this up for council discussion or questions, I just want to confirm with legal counsel that your advice to us, we'll take the vote on the amendment today. That's frankly largely technical in nature. And then it's my understanding that we are not going to take a final vote today, but that the recommendation is that we continue this to Wednesday, February 23rd at 10:20 a.m. Can I get a confirmation that that is what we're doing logistically?
Mayor, I'm not sure if I had understood it was February 24th at 2 p.m. So I may have misunderstood that. I don't know if Megan.
Megan, do you have clarity on when we are continuing this?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. It all depends on how much time you'll need for the continued item. If it will be 45 minutes or longer, we do have a hold for February 24th at 2 p.m. If it will be less than 45 minutes, we do have time at 10:20 on the February 23rd Wednesday AM session.
Why don't we go
Mayor is
ahead?
checking. I'm assuming that public record is still open and it will close either that morning or the day before.
Well, that's what I was hoping to get some clarity on. This, I assume that the oral record is closed now, and we will keep the written record open until presumably what, the morning of whichever day we choose.
That's our recommendation.
Why don't we go ahead and do it for the 23rd, the morning session, and if we go over, we go over. I mean, we do this all the time. It's just lunch. Who cares, right? We can eat and talk. We're all friendly people. So why don't we go ahead and take the February 23rd slot? That was 10:20, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we are going to, at the end of this, continue this until February 23rd at 10:20 a.m. We will keep the record open till what, 9:30 a.m. on that day? Heidi, what's your recommendation?
Yes, Mayor, that's correct. And just, Mayor, just so you know, I don't know if you're aware, we had put on the Rethink website and had told people that the actual vote would happen on February 24th. I don't know that, I mean, you can
Okay,
certainly.
no, this is all good information. It's just information I need before I have this conversation. So let's go back to the 24th.
Thank you.
That is time certain 2 p.m., correct?
Yes.
And the record will close at 9, what time that day?
I think noon is fine, Mayor.
Noon is fine. Okay, so let me practice this one more time to make sure we have it correct. So at the end of today, I will reiterate this, but we will be planning right now to continue this conversation to Thursday, February 24th, 2 p.m. time certain. The oral record is now closed. The written record will remain open until noon on February 24th. And with that, colleagues, I'll entertain questions, comments. Don't let me leave today without us voting on the amendment. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. I just, because I don't know who will be here when we finally take the final vote, I just wanted to just take a few minutes of appreciation. And first to you, Mayor, because, you know, when I showed up in January 2019 and I said to you, I want to work with you on the next police contract, and you welcomed it. And you said, this is great, I'll have help. And then we invited all the rest of council to be a part of that process. I would have never thought that as a council, we could have been working together with a shared message, with a shared vision, with shared priorities, and come up with a contract that I think it's safe to say that, like, nobody's jumping up and down about it, but we know that we're on the path that was unimaginable in January of 2019. So I want to take a moment to really appreciate you, Mayor Wheeler. I want to really appreciate you, Stephen. You are a gem, and I'm so grateful that Heidi already knew you were a gem and encouraged us to bring you on board. Heidi, you have always been a superstar, but in this particular process, you certainly have the longevity and a long history that actually helped us get some of the transformation that we needed. But I cannot stop this without saying Carly Edwards from my office has put so much sweat and tears and heart and soul into making sure that this contract got to the finish line. And I know it took a personal toll on her because as people came and went, she was the constant holding down this space for other commissioner staff folks. And so I want to publicly really appreciate Holly for the incredible amount of time and energy and work she put into this process. Let's see, what else did I want to say? And I want to just circle back full circle. When the mayor and I started this in January 2019, we said, we're going to engage the community. We're going to have a transparent process. We're going to be as open as we possibly can be. And though several community members testified that it wasn't as transparent as they would have liked, I think we can all agree that it's 100 times better than the last contract talks, which actually were in 2016, which led to a police riot that kicked community members out on the street, which was actually the reason why I decided to vote that day in October of 2016 was my motivation to run for this seat. And so I did not want to leave today without appreciating the mayor and appreciating how far we came as a council, having one voice when it came to discussing the police contract and where we were moving in the future. So thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty, I'll get to Commissioner Rubio in a moment, but I can't let this go without thanking you. I agree with you. I think we've raised the bar. We've moved in the right direction down the path. We established a process. It didn't quite unfold exactly the way we wanted. We did not anticipate a global pandemic and the complete closure of our economy and all of our public buildings. But we created a template that I think will be used by city councils for many, many years in the future. That's not to say there won't be refinements or improvements, but we've now set a high bar that future councils, I believe, will follow. And the results speak for themselves. And I want to thank you. Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you. I'm just going to do a little bit more of a positive pile-on here and just express my thanks as well to Heidi and Stephen first. And Kathy, thank you so much as a first-year commissioner, taking the time that we needed to really understand the issue and work with myself and my team and also my new colleagues. And also Mayor Wheeler, again, thank you. I want to echo Commissioner Hardesty about being so open to being collaborative with us and recognizing this is something that impacts all of us as a city, and we all as a council bear responsibility. And also, it's incumbent upon us to be part of this work alongside you. And it was our honor to do that, and just very appreciative of that, Mayor. And Commissioner Hardesty, thank you for your mentorship and all your years of service and the background that you provided all of us that were new to this. It was very critical in helping us form our analysis as we move forward. And just lastly, I just want to really appreciate also PPB and also Sergeant Smells for all the work together. But most importantly, thank you to our staffs who put in countless hours. I want to also call out my staff, Rico Lujan Valerio, who's been very, very involved and jumped in with both feet on day one, and is doing probably more than humanly possible for one staff person right now. That probably borders on unhealthy for him, but we're so appreciative of his work. And I just want to highlight how collaborative all our teams have worked together, and how well, and what a wonderful model moving forward. I know this contract is not the panacea for all things, for all community, but I am so proud that this is moving us forward in a direction that we need to go. And these are important steps in that direction. And I know it keeps us laser focused on what we needed. And that's what we did in this process, and we'll continue to do moving forward. So I'll save the rest of my comments for next week, but just wanted to make sure that I shared those on the record tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Commissioner Rubio. Colleagues, if there's nothing else, Commissioner Hardesty.
I'm sorry, Mayor, just one more thank you. And it's Assistant Deputy Chief Fromm. Deputy Chief Fromm just like stepped in at like the last hour and really made an enormous difference. And so I just want to really appreciate how wonderful it's been to get to know Deputy Chief Fromm and his just can-do attitude. I've never met anyone like him. It's like you ask him a question, it's like 10 minutes later, you have an answer. So I just want to appreciate him. He wasn't involved at the very beginning, but man, when he came on board, we didn't miss a step at all. So Chief Fromm, if you're listening, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, he is, and you're right. We're lucky to have his counsel. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. So I moved and Commissioner Hardesty seconded an amendment. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Megan, please call the roll on the amendment.
Rubio?
Aye.
Ryan?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Maps?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The amendment carries. And so with that, colleagues, we will continue this item to February 24th at 2 p.m. time certain. The oral record is now closed. The written record will remain open until noon on Thursday, February 24th. That means if somebody wants, they can send us emails or communications or information. They can chime in. The easiest way is through the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. Heidi, is there anything we forgot?
You got it all, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, good. Thanks, everybody. With that, then, we are adjourned. Thank you.